My name is Eleanor Washington, and at 73 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I raised my daughter Sarah as a single mother in Chicago, working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria to put her through college. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own comfort, my own happiness to give her everything she needed. And for what? Last Tuesday evening, I was coming back from my daily walk around our neighborhood in Lincoln Park when I heard voices coming from Sarah's apartment downstairs. The walls in this old brownstone are thin, and her voice carried clearly through the heating vents. She was on the phone with her husband Michael, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Mom is becoming such a burden, Michael. She's always here, always needing something. We can't even have a quiet dinner without her knocking on our door or calling about some trivial problem. Her voice was sharp, impatient. I think it's time we seriously consider assisted living. There's a nice place in Evanston that takes Medicare. I stood frozen in my kitchen, my hand gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles went white. The Chicago wind rattled the windows, but all I could hear was my daughter's voice continuing to dissect my existence like I was some inconvenient piece of furniture. She doesn't understand that we have our own lives now. We're trying to save for the house in Naperville, and having her here, it's just complicated everything. I love her, but I can't keep being her caretaker forever. Caretaker. The word hit me like a slap. When had I become someone who needed taking care of? When had my presence in my own daughter's life become such an inconvenience that she discussed disposing of me like yesterday's newspaper? I thought about all those nights I stayed up when she had fever, all the times I walked her to school in the bitter Chicago winters because I couldn't afford a car. I remembered working Christmas shifts so she could have the bicycle she wanted, eating peanut butter sandwiches for weeks so she could go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the familiar sounds of the city outside seeming distant and hollow. I sat down heavily in my worn armchair, the same one I'd rocked her to sleep in as a baby, and felt something inside me crack open. But as the tears dried on my cheeks and the anger settled into something harder, something more determined, I realized that maybe it was time for Sarah to learn what real burden felt like. He next morning brought one of those crisp October days that make Chicago beautiful, with golden leaves swirling down Michigan Avenue and the lake sparkling in the distance. But I couldn't appreciate any of it. Sarah's words from the night before played on repeat in my mind like a broken record. I was sitting in my kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee, when I heard her key in the lock. She always let herself in, something that used to make me feel loved and needed. Now it felt like an invasion. "Morning, Mom," she called out cheerfully, as if she hadn't just been planning my exile the night before. She walked into the kitchen wearing her expensive yoga clothes, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Everything about her screamed success, comfort, the life I had worked so hard to give her. "How are you feeling today? You look tired." She kissed my forehead with the same mechanical affection she probably showed her clients at the marketing firm. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my coffee mug against the wall and demand to know how she could stand there, pretending to care when she'd been discussing shipping me off like damaged goods. Instead, I smiled and said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just didn't sleep well. Maybe you should see Dr. Peterson about that. Sleep problems can be serious at your age." At my age. Every word felt calculated now, part of her building case for why I needed professional care. She bustled around my kitchen, reorganizing things that didn't need reorganizing, talking about her upcoming promotion and the house she and Michael were looking at in the suburbs, the house that apparently had no room for an aging mother. "The neighborhood is perfect for when we start having kids," she said, not looking at me. "Great schools, safe streets. It's everything we've dreamed of, everything they'd dreamed of." I noticed she didn't say "we" anymore when talking about family. Somewhere along the way, I had been edited out of their future, relegated to a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. After she left for work, I sat in the silence of my apartment and felt the full weight of my loneliness. But then I thought about James, the building's janitor, who always stopped to chat when he saw me in the lobby, who asked about my day and actually listened to the answer, who helped me carry groceries without being asked and never made me feel like I was imposing. Maybe it was time I paid more attention to who really saw me as a person worth knowing. Where are you watching this story from? I'd love to know what part of the world is following Eleanor's journey. And tell me, what would you do if you overheard your own child planning to put you away? The days that followed felt like walking through thick fog. I went through the motions of my routine: morning coffee, afternoon walk to Grant Park, evening news. But everything felt muted, distant. Sarah continued her daily visits, bringing groceries I didn't ask for and asking questions about my health with the clinical detachment of someone building a medical case. I found myself studying her face during these visits, searching for traces of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who would beg me to read just one more story before bedtime. That child seemed to have vanished completely, replaced by this efficient stranger who spoke to me like I was already halfway to the grave. "Mom, have you been taking your blood pressure medication?" she asked one afternoon, checking the pill organizer she'd bought me. Everything was about pills and doctors and safety concerns now. "Yes, Sarah. I've been taking care of myself for 73 years. I think I can manage a few pills." She gave me that look, the one that said she thought I was being difficult, unreasonable, the same look she used to give me when I wouldn't let her stay out past curfew in high school. "I'm just worried about you living alone. What if something happens? What if you fall and no one finds you for hours? What if? Her entire relationship with me had become a series of catastrophic possibilities, each one another reason why I couldn't be trusted with my own life. I started spending more time in the lobby, partly to escape the suffocating concern of my apartment, partly because I enjoyed my conversations with James. He was probably in his early 60s, a tall man with kind eyes and hands that showed a lifetime of honest work. While Sarah saw me as a collection of potential medical emergencies, James saw me as Eleanor, someone with stories worth hearing and opinions worth considering. "How's your daughter doing?" he asked one afternoon as he watered the plants in the lobby. The autumn light streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in gold. "She's busy," I said, not trusting myself to say more. James nodded, understanding somehow that there was more to the story. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to really see," he said quietly. "They get so caught up in who they think we are, they forget to notice who we actually are." His words hit me like a revelation. Sarah didn't see me anymore. She saw an obligation, a responsibility, a problem to be managed. But James saw Eleanor Washington, the woman who had raised a daughter alone, who had worked 2 jobs for 15 years, who still read 3 books a month and could discuss everything from politics to poetry. That night, I sat in my armchair and felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates rearranging themselves deep underground. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath it was growing something else, a quiet determination that surprised me with its strength. Maybe it was time to remind everyone exactly who Eleanor Washington really was. October in Chicago has always been my favorite time of year. The tourists have gone home, the oppressive summer heat has lifted, and the city settles into that comfortable rhythm that only locals truly understand. This particular October, though, I was discovering something I hadn't expected at my age: a genuine friendship. James and I had fallen into an easy routine. Every morning around 10, after he'd finished the building's maintenance rounds, we'd sit in the lobby and talk. He'd bring coffee from the deli down the street, the good kind, not the watery stuff from the building's ancient machine. And we'd discuss everything from the Cubs' disappointing season to the books we were reading. "You know," he said one morning, settling into the chair across from me, "I've been working in buildings like this for 30 years, and most people look right through me. You're one of the few who actually sees me as a person." I understood exactly what he meant. Sarah looked at me and saw a medical chart waiting to happen. Her husband, Michael, barely acknowledged my existence. But James looked at me and saw someone worth talking to, someone whose thoughts and experiences mattered. "Tell me about your family," I said, genuinely curious. In all our conversations, he'd mentioned a son in the military, but never elaborated. His face lit up. "Marcus is stationed in Germany right now. He's a sergeant in the army, been in for 8 years, sends me pictures of all the places he's been. Italy, Poland, places I never thought I'd see even in photographs." He pulled out his phone, showing me images of a young man in uniform standing in front of ancient European buildings. "You must be so proud." Every single day. He grew up without much. His mother and I divorced when he was 12, and I was working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. But he never complained, never got into trouble, just focused on his studies and his goals. James's voice carried the same pride I used to hear in my own voice when talking about Sarah's achievements. We talked about our children, about the sacrifices we'd made, about the hopes we'd carried. But there was a difference in how James spoke about Marcus versus how Sarah spoke about me. James's love was uncomplicated, proud, forward-looking. Sarah's had become burdened with resentment and obligation. "Sometimes I think about what I'll leave him," James continued. "I don't have much. This job doesn't exactly come with a pension plan, but I've got some savings, and I own a little house in Bronzeville that my grandmother left me. It's not fancy, but it's paid for." As he spoke, I found myself thinking about my own will, locked away in the safe deposit box at First National. Everything left to Sarah, of course. The apartment, my savings account, the small investment portfolio my late husband had built. It had seemed natural, automatic. She was my daughter. She would inherit everything. But sitting there with James, listening to him talk about his son with such uncomplicated love, I began to wonder if blood relation was really the most important factor in deciding who deserved your legacy. That afternoon, Sarah stopped by with more concerns about my living situation. But for the first time in weeks, her words bounced off me like rain on a window. I had remembered something important. I was Eleanor Washington, and I still had choices to make. What would you do in my situation? Sometimes the people who truly care about us aren't the ones we expect. Have you ever found family in unexpected places? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of Eleanor's story. November arrived with an early snowfall that blanketed Chicago in pristine white, making even our old neighborhood look magical. But the beauty outside couldn't mask the growing tension in my apartment. Sarah's visits had become more frequent and more pointed, each one feeling like an interrogation disguised as concern. "Mom, I've made an appointment for you to tour Sunset Manor next week," she announced one Tuesday morning. Not asking, but telling. "It's a beautiful facility, and they have an opening in their assisted living wing." I set down my coffee cup carefully, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "I didn't realize I had agreed to tour anywhere. You haven't been yourself lately. You seem distant, confused sometimes." Her voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Dr. Peterson thinks a more structured environment might be beneficial." Dr. Peterson, my family physician for 20 years, who had apparently been recruited into Sarah's campaign to relocate me. I wondered what version of my mental state she had presented to him, what carefully selected concerns she had shared to build her case. "I'm not confused, Sarah. I'm disappointed." The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw her flinch slightly. Disappointed about what? I almost told her then, almost laid it all out. The conversation I'd overheard, the way she spoke about me like I was already gone, the casual cruelty of planning my exile while pretending to love me. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the growing certainty that words wouldn't change anything anyway. "Nothing, sweetheart. I'm just tired." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and felt the full weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about moving to a facility. This was about being erased from my own life, reduced to a problem that needed solving. The apartment that held 40 years of memories would be sold. The independence I'd fought so hard to maintain would be surrendered. The woman I'd been would disappear into the sterile routine of institutional care. But as I sat there in the gathering dusk, I thought about my conversation with James that morning. He'd been telling me about his plans to visit Marcus in Germany next spring, his face glowing with excitement about seeing his son and the places he'd only heard about in letters. "You know what I realized?" he'd said. "I spent so many years working and saving and planning for someday that I almost forgot to live for today. But Marcus keeps reminding me that life is happening right now, not in some future I might not even see." His words echoed in my mind as I pulled out my address book and found the number for my lawyer, Robert Chen. We'd known each other for 15 years, ever since he'd helped me with my husband's estate. If I was going to make changes, real changes, I needed to do it properly. "Eleanor, how wonderful to hear from you," Robert said when I called. "What can I do for you?" "I need to update my will," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Completely." There was a pause. "Of course. Are we talking about minor adjustments or major changes?" I looked around my apartment, at the photos of Sarah on every surface, at the life I'd built and was about to lose. "Major changes, Robert. Very major changes." As I scheduled the appointment for the following week, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control over my own destiny. Sarah might be planning my future, But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. It was still my life to live, and my legacy to leave. The law office of Chen and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming building in the Loop, with windows that offered a spectacular view of Lake Michigan stretching endlessly toward the horizon. I'd dressed carefully for this appointment. My best navy suit, the pearl earrings my husband had given me for our 20th anniversary, my mother's gold watch that had survived the Great Depression. I wanted to look like a woman in full command of her faculties, not someone who needed to be managed and contained like a fragile antique. Robert Chen greeted me with the same warm professionalism he'd shown for 15 years. He was a small man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he'd always treated me with respect, never talking down to me or assuming I didn't understand the legal complexities of my own affairs. His office was lined with law books and family photos, creating an atmosphere of both authority and warmth. "So, Eleanor, you mentioned wanting to make major changes to your will. Can you tell me what you have in mind?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. The Chicago skyline stretched behind him, a testament to the city where I'd built my life, raised my daughter, and learned the hardest lessons about love and loyalty. I want to remove my daughter as the primary beneficiary and leave everything to James Morrison instead. Robert's pen stopped moving. He looked up at me with concern, not judgment, his expression carefully neutral in the way lawyers learn to master. That's certainly a significant change. James Morrison. Is this a family member I haven't met? He's the janitor in my building, and he's become the closest thing to family I have left. I spent the next hour telling Robert about the conversation I'd overheard, about Sarah's plans to warehouse me in assisted living, about the way James treated me with dignity and genuine affection. I told him about our morning conversations over coffee, about how James remembered details about my life that Sarah had forgotten, about the way he looked at me and saw Eleanor Washington, teacher, mother, survivor, instead of just an aging woman to be managed. Robert listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, his expression growing more understanding as the story unfolded. When I described Sarah's casual dismissal of my friendship with James, calling it just talking to the janitor, I saw something shift in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the cruelty that can hide behind concern. "I want to be very clear about something," he said when I finished. "This is your money, your property, your decision. But I have to ask, have you considered the possibility of a middle ground? Perhaps leaving James a substantial portion while still providing something for Sarah?" I'd thought about that, actually. Late at night in my apartment, I'd imagined different scenarios, different ways to divide my legacy. But every time I pictured Sarah's face when she learned about a reduced inheritance, I saw not grief or regret, but calculation. She'd probably contest the will, claim I was mentally incompetent, drag James through a legal nightmare he didn't deserve. She'd turn my final act of agency into another battle to be fought and won. "No," I said firmly, "all of it goes to James. The apartment, the savings, the investments, everything. Sarah made her choice when she decided I was a burden. Now, I'm making mine." Robert nodded slowly, making additional notes. "Very well. I'll need to bring in a witness and a notary to make this official. And Eleanor, I want you to know that in my professional opinion, you're demonstrating complete mental clarity and sound judgment. If anyone ever questions your capacity to make this decision, I'll be happy to testify to that effect." The process took another hour. Robert's secretary, Mrs. Patterson, served as witness, and a notary public was called in to make everything official. As I signed the new will, my hand was steady, my mind clear. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Sarah had tried to take away. The apartment where I'd raised her, where I'd grieved my husband, where I'd built a life, it would go to someone who saw its value not in dollars, but in the love it represented. The savings account I'd built penny by penny, working double shifts and skipping meals, it would go to someone who understood the weight of honest work. The investment portfolio that represented my husband's dreams for our future, it would go to someone who still believed in dreaming, who talked about his son's achievements with the same pride I'd once felt for Sarah. When it was done, Robert handed me a copy of the new will in a sealed envelope. "Where would you like me to keep the original?" "In your safe for now. I'll let you know when it's time to execute it." Walking out of that building into the crisp November air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The weight of obligation, of trying to be the mother Sarah wanted rather than the woman I was, had lifted from my shoulders. Sarah could make her plans, tour her facilities, discuss my future like I wasn't in the room. But she'd forgotten one crucial thing. It was still my life, and I still had the power to write its final chapter. Have you ever had to make a decision that completely changed your family's future? Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that finally set us free. What do you think about Eleanor's decision? December brought the kind of bitter cold that makes Chicago feel like the edge of the world. The lake froze solid, creating a vast white expanse that stretched to the horizon, and the wind cut through the streets like a knife, sending pedestrians hurrying into doorways and coffee shops. But inside our building, something warmer was growing. James had started bringing hot chocolate to our morning conversations, rich and sweet from the little cafe on Clark Street, and I'd begun sharing stories I hadn't told anyone in years. "You know," I said one morning, watching the snow swirl past the lobby windows in hypnotic patterns, "I used to be a teacher before I got married. 3rd grade. I loved those kids like they were my own." James smiled, settling back in his chair with the easy comfort of someone who had nowhere else to be. "I can see that. You've got that teacher way about you, patient but firm. Marcus would have loved having you as a teacher." It struck me then how easily James could imagine me in different roles, different contexts. To him, I wasn't just an elderly woman to be managed. I was someone with a full life, complete with dreams and disappointments and wisdom earned through experience. He could picture me standing in front of a classroom, helping children learn to read, wiping away tears after playground accidents. Sarah, by contrast, seemed unable to see me as anything other than her aging mother, a responsibility that had grown too heavy to bear. "Tell me more about your teaching days," James said, genuinely interested. "What was your favorite part?" I found myself talking about things I hadn't thought about in decades. The way children's faces lit up when they finally understood a difficult concept, the satisfaction of watching shy students find their voices, the heartbreak of saying goodbye each June, knowing some of them would face difficult summers at home. James listened with the same attention he gave to everything, asking questions that showed he was really hearing me, not just waiting for his turn to speak. That afternoon, Sarah arrived with Michael in tow, both of them wearing the grim expressions of people about to deliver bad news. They sat across from me in my living room like a tribunal, Michael's expensive suit and Sarah's designer handbag making my modest apartment feel suddenly shabby. The contrast was stark. Where James saw comfort and history in my worn furniture and faded photographs, they saw only decline and inadequacy. "Mom, we need to talk," Sarah began, her voice carrying that false gentleness people use when they're about to steamroll you. "We've put a deposit down on a room at Sunset Manor. They have an opening in January, and we think it's the perfect opportunity. We've also spoken to a realtor about the apartment," Michael added, not meeting my eyes. His discomfort was obvious, but not enough to stop him from participating in this orchestrated dismantling of my life. "The market is strong right now, and this place should sell quickly. The proceeds will help cover the cost of your care." I looked at them sitting there, so confident in their plans, so certain they knew what was best for me. They'd divided up my life like a business transaction, allocated my assets, scheduled my future. The only thing they hadn't done was ask what I wanted. In their minds, my preferences had become irrelevant, my autonomy a luxury I could no longer afford. "And what if I don't want to go?" I asked quietly. Sarah exchanged a look with Michael, the kind of look that said they'd anticipated this resistance and prepared for it. They'd probably discussed my stubbornness the same way they'd discussed my confusion and my safety concerns, as symptoms of a problem that needed solving, rather than expressions of a person who still had the right to choose. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly about this. Living alone at your age isn't safe. What if you fall? What if you have a medical emergency? What if I'm happier here than I would be in some facility where strangers decide when I eat and sleep and take my medications?" "It's not like that," Michael said, his tone patronizing in the way that made my teeth clench. "These places are very nice now. They have activities, social programs. I have activities. I have social programs. I have a life here." Sarah leaned forward, her patience clearly wearing thin. The mask of concern was slipping, revealing the frustration underneath. "Mom, be realistic. What kind of life? You spend your days talking to the janitor and reading books. That's not living. That's just existing." The casual dismissal of my friendship with James, the reduction of my daily joys to mere existing, hit me like a physical blow. But it also crystallized something I'd been feeling for weeks. Sarah didn't just want to move me to assisted living. She wanted to erase the person I'd become in favor of the person she thought I should be. In her vision of my future, there was no room for morning conversations over coffee, no space for the quiet pleasures I'd learned to treasure, no recognition that happiness could take forms she didn't understand or approve of. After they left, the apartment felt different, smaller somehow, as if their plans had already begun to shrink my world. I sat in my kitchen and called Robert Chen, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "Eleanor, how are you holding up?" "They're moving faster than I expected. I think it's time." "Are you sure?" "Once we execute the will, there's no going back." I thought about James, probably upstairs right now reading a letter from Marcus or watching the evening news in his small apartment. I thought about the way he listened when I talked, the way he saw me as a whole person rather than a collection of problems to be solved. I thought about Sarah's dismissive words about my friendship with him, and I felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. "I'm sure, Robert, it's time." That evening, as I prepared for bed, I felt a strange sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like Eleanor Washington again. Not someone's burden, not someone's problem, but a woman with the power to choose her own legacy. The call came on a Tuesday morning in January, 3 days after I'd been moved to Sunset Manor against my wishes. The transition had been swift and efficient, orchestrated by Sarah and Michael with the precision of a military operation. One day I was in my apartment, surrounded by 40 years of memories, and the next I was in a sterile room that smelled like disinfectant and other people's sadness, looking out at a parking lot instead of the tree-lined street I'd called home. Sarah's voice on the phone was shaky, confused, nothing like the confident tone she'd used when orchestrating my exile. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with your will. The lawyer says everything goes to the building janitor. That can't be right." I was sitting in my new home, a room painted that particular shade of beige that's supposed to be calming but just feels like giving up. The furniture was functional but soulless, chosen for safety rather than comfort. There were no personal touches yet, no photographs or books or the small treasures that make a space feel lived in. It was a room designed for existing, not living. Exactly the kind of place Sarah thought was appropriate for someone like me. "There's no mistake, Sarah." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought she might have hung up. I could picture her standing in my old kitchen. Her kitchen now, I supposed, probably surrounded by boxes as she prepared to sell my life piece by piece. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, uncertain, stripped of the authority she'd wielded so confidently just days before. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I changed my will. Everything goes to James Morrison. The apartment, the savings, the investment portfolio, all of it." But why? He's nobody. He's the man who treated me like a human being when my own daughter decided I was a burden. The words came out steady and clear, each one chosen with the precision I'd once used when explaining difficult concepts to third graders. Another silence, this one filled with the weight of everything we'd never said to each other. I could hear her breathing, could imagine the shock and confusion playing across her face as she tried to process what I'd done. The careful plans she'd made, the future she'd assumed was guaranteed, all of it crumbling with a few simple sentences. "You heard," she whispered finally. "I heard you tell your husband that I was in the way of your happiness, that it was time to accommodate me somewhere else. I heard you reduce 40 years of sacrifice to an inconvenience that needed managing." The memory of that conversation still stung, but the pain had transformed into something harder, more purposeful. The sound she made might have been a sob, or just a sharp intake of breath. "Mom, I didn't mean..." "You meant every word, Sarah. And now you have to live with the consequences. But the apartment, the money, that was supposed to be for my future, for my children." "Your children?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean the grandchildren you never wanted me to be around? The family you were building that had no room for the woman who raised you?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had spent months talking about my future as if I had no say in it, making decisions about my life as if my wishes were irrelevant. Now she was discovering that I still had one decision left to make, one final choice that was entirely mine. I could hear her crying now. Real tears, not the calculated emotion she'd used to manipulate me into compliance. But it was too late for tears, too late for regret. The time for honest conversation had passed when she chose to discuss my fate behind my back rather than with me. James Morrison spent 30 years working honest jobs to support his son. He treated me with dignity when you treated me like damaged goods. He saw Eleanor Washington when you saw only a problem to be solved. If anyone deserves the legacy I built, it's him. Please, Mom, we can fix this. I can bring you home. We can… Home? The word felt foreign in my mouth. You sold my home, remember? You decided that what I wanted didn't matter, that what I felt was irrelevant. You made your choice, Sarah. Now live with it. I hung up the phone and sat back in the uncomfortable chair they'd provided, looking out at the gray January sky. Snow was beginning to fall again, covering the parking lot in a fresh layer of white that would soon turn gray and slushy under the wheels of cars and the feet of visitors who came to see other people's parents and grandparents. In a few hours, James would receive a call that would change his life forever. He'd probably be shocked, maybe even try to refuse the inheritance. But Robert Chen would explain that it was legal, binding, final. James would be able to quit his job, visit his son in Germany, maybe even help Marcus buy a house when he returned from the service. The money I'd saved working double shifts and skipping meals would go to someone who understood its value, who would use it to build something beautiful rather than simply accumulate more. Sarah would contest it, of course. She'd claim I was mentally incompetent, that James had manipulated me. She'd hire lawyers and file papers and make accusations. But Robert had been thorough in documenting my mental clarity, and the truth was simple. I'd given my legacy to someone who had earned it through kindness, rather than someone who expected it through blood. That evening, as I sat in the common room listening to other residents talk about children who visited once a month and grandchildren who sent cards on birthdays, I thought about the lesson I'd taught my daughter. Not the lesson she'd wanted to learn, but the one she needed to understand, that love is a choice, respect is earned, and family is defined not by blood, but by how we treat each other when it matters most. The other residents' stories were variations on the same theme: children too busy to visit, families who saw them as obligations rather than people, the slow fade from relevance to invisibility that seemed to be the fate of so many elderly parents. But I was different. I'd refused to fade quietly. I'd made my final choice count. I'd spent 73 years learning that lesson myself. Sarah would have the rest of her life to figure out if she understood it too. Maybe someday she'd realize that the greatest inheritance I could have left her wasn't money or property, but the understanding that how we treat people matters more than what we expect from them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't money or property. It's the truth about who we are and what we value. If you've made it this far in Eleanor's story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And remember, it's never too late to choose who deserves your love, your respect, and your legacy. The end.